Hello and welcome to yet another edition of Healthy Living here on At Times. Now remember, Healthy Living is a program where we talk about all things non-communicable diseases. I am Tabby Ikamangala, and remember, this program is sponsored by MASM.
You have all your MASM information in one place. With the MASM mobile app, all MASM members register on the MASM mobile app. Download the app from Apple Store or Google Play Store. Install and open. Click register to register. Enter your membership number. The default membership number has 9 digits. If you don't succeed, try 11 digits. Choose your name, password, and OTP destination. Remember, when adding your mobile number, 265, not plus 265. You can also register with your email address easily and keep updated with your MASM account right in the palm of your hand. For more information, email infodesk@masm.mw or visit www.masm.mw.
Now, joining me in today's program is Eliza Nkudumola, a public health professional who works with the Malawi Liverpool Wellcome Trust. We're going to be talking about cervical cancer in today's program. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tabby.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good. Now, let's just kickstart the interview because we've got a lot of ground to cover.
Yes.
What is cervical cancer?
So cervical cancer is the cancer that affects the cervix. So that's a brief explanation. And so I know you guys have had people come before and explain what cancer is or whatever, so I'm not going to go into that. But it's just a cancer that affects the cervix. And the cervix is an opening, I guess, of the woman's, birth canal. So it's a door to the uterus in a way. Yeah, so that's the cervix, and the cancer affects that part of the woman.
So because only a woman has a cervix,
Yes.
and cervical cancer is only found in women.
Yes.
What is the cause of cervical cancer?
So the cervical cancer is caused actually by a virus. It's called HPV. So it's a human papilloma virus. It's actually a virus that is mostly transmitted. The one that causes cervical cancer is transmitted through sexual intercourse. So they are actually different. Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So there are different types of HPVs. Some, I think, actually, one of the family of those viruses is, we may all know once in a while, I think as we call them headache sores. Sometimes you get a sore on your mouth. Now it's a family of those viruses. So one of those viruses is the one that also causes that.
Okay.
You know what I mean? But there's a type that I think there are two. I can't remember. I won't really go into details. But they're in that family, there are some of those viruses that cause cervical cancer, and it's usually that virus is usually transmitted through sexual intercourse. Yes, so it's a virus, and so the good news though about cervical cancer is one of those few cancers that can be prevented, and also if caught early can be cured.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, but before we get to that,
yes.
How do you know that you've got cervical cancer? What are the signs and symptoms?
Okay, so if by the time you start feeling or that you have cervical, it's too late. So most of us, if I have the HP virus, you wouldn't know. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Yes. So, but this is why I'm sure you've heard of cervical cancer screening. It's here in Malawi. They talk about, and everywhere, even outside Malawi, we talk about cervical cancer screening. So the idea is that because I've said it's caused by a virus, and so for us women, it's important to get those. And most public health professionals recommend yearly pap smears, when you go again. Exactly. And that's when most of the times it's caught. So when you go to the hospital, they do the physical exam, and usually the doctor might notice some changes in your cervix. Or sometimes they actually get samples and they screen that and they can tell So when it's caught early, the treatment is simple. I know like it's usually, I don't know how they do it because I'm not a doctor, but they use like vinegar, just simple vinegar. So it's a very low cost treatment that can save somebody's life. But the key is it has to be caught early. So by the time you're feeling that, that something is wrong, there are symptoms, maybe like, regular bleeding, or maybe you might feel pain, or a lot of things. Unfortunately, that is normally in the later stages of the disease. But when it's early on, you wouldn't know. The only way, a doctor or someone can say you have, if they do this physical screen, they screen you, and then, as I said, the treatment, the cure is simple. Sometimes it's just a matter of, I guess, they have different treats. So one of them is the one that I was saying, they use vinegar to kind of kill the affected cells in a way, or some of it is they use I think curation, like it's burning of the affected cell. So it can be cured, but the key is it has to be caught early, and then also it can be prevented. So I'm sure most of us, if we listen to the radio or we on social media, there's I don't know if it's still going on, but there's a campaign to vaccinate young girls 9 to 12 years old.
Right.
It's an HPV vaccine.
Okay.
Yes, and that vaccine helps, prevents you if you ever get exposed to the virus that I was talking about through sexual intercourse, for that virus to get to a point where it makes you get cervical cancer.
I mean, you just spoke about a vaccine that even a 9-year-old or a 12-year-old young girl can get. Yes. Which brings me to my next question and my next point. At what age can you get cervical cancer? So,
normally it's usually later, so maybe from 30 or whatever.
Okay.
So as I said, it's that virus is transmitted through sexual intercourse. So this vaccine that I'm talking about, the age range is 9 to 12. That's the age that can get it. So the idea is that someone has to get that before they become sexually active. So, and this is what I want to share to all women here in Malawi and everywhere. If you've ever had sex, or if you are at a risk of getting cervical cancer, therefore you should get regular checks, regular screening, and these are free, and the good thing there, I know like Dream does that, even at Queens they do a lot of, everywhere where you get gynecological services, they do screen you for cervical cancer. And so there are also, I know also HIV positive women are at a higher risk. So everyone is at risk. If you're a woman, and if you've ever had sexual intercourse, those are risks.
Right.
The vaccine is only for girls, and in other countries, even boys get it. Because, if the virus is transmitted through sexual intercourse, yes, only women do get cervical cancer, but as a man, you can transmit that virus into a woman who can, and it doesn't mean that everyone that get that virus will get cervical cancer. No. So now I don't know the mechanism of it, why in some people it does develop into cancer, and in some it doesn't. But all of us, everyone is at risk. If you've ever had sexual intercourse, you're at risk of developing cervical cancer.
Wow.
But you can prevent it, and if it's caught early, it can be cured.
Right.
And so we can all do something to prevent it. It's one of, if not the only one of the few cancers that can be prevented. Okay. And the cure is simple and accessible.
Right.
But the main thing is it has to be caught early, and that's why it's important for all of us to get that screening, and it has to be, and there's a timeline. I think usually if you go, they do tell you depending on your risk, because all of us, depending on our age, our HIV status, our lifestyle, the doctor can advise you how often you should get screened.
Right. Speaking of screening, we'll talk more about that right after this. You're watching Healthy Living, and we'll be back with more right after this.
Life is an up and down journey where anything can happen at any time. But at any time, you have peace of mind with Mazim. Mazim offers all-inclusive affordable medical aid cover in various packages of schemes in line with your budget, with a promise to take care of you and your family in that time of dire need. From giving you access to medical services at hospitals locally and abroad, emergency evacuation, dentist, and optical care, all the way to funeral benefits. Mazim is there holding your hand, keeping you covered. For details of the medical scheme you need, call 01-820-298, 01-820-543, 0888-707-100, fax 01-820-217, email infodesk@mazim.mw, or visit www.mazim.mw. Mazim, your ultimate healthcare solution.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us, you're watching Healthy Living here on At Times. Now, earlier, we were talking about what cervical cancer is, what it's caused by, and what are the signs and symptoms. And right now, we want to focus on screening, the screening process, because you said that it can be prevented and there is a cure. But I want to focus on the screening.
Okay.
At what age can you start the screening?
Okay. So, it's a bit tricky for me to say, right?
Yeah.
As I said, the virus that causes cervical cancer is transmitted through sexual intercourse. So, unfortunately, we know that at the age that most of people their first sexual intercourse varies,
Yes.
So what I would say is, for as a woman, I don't know the guidelines for Malawi, because most countries do have guidelines, so I'm not going to try to tell people false information. But what I want to emphasize is, if you know that you've had sex, and mostly unprotected sex, your chances of developing cervical cancer or whatever is high, because of that. Yeah. So my advice would be for women, young women especially, if you're like around 20, whatever, it doesn't hurt, go get screened. And then for older women, you should definitely be getting screened regularly. And as I said, it varies. Like most of the times, if you go to if you go anywhere where they offer maternal health services, so even like health centers or here at Queens, that I talked about Dream, because these are the places that I know that do screen, Banjalan, Sogolo, and many other places around the country that screen for. Go there and you'll be advised. They will ask you questions and they can give you information on what needs to be done. Because what I want to emphasize again, and I'm glad we're both mentioning that, cervical cancer can be prevented and it can be cured if it's caught early. Now, even later, it's we all know, and it's not just Malawi. I know sometimes people focus on, Malawi is a poor country. Yes, that is true. Malawi, our healthcare system is not as developed. That is true. But even in other countries, people die from cervical cancer. It's not just here in Malawi. Unfortunately, that most of the times happens when the person goes to seek care when it's kind of like in an advanced stage. And that is with any cancer too. It's very difficult. Cancer is a very difficult disease to cure, But most of the cancers, especially cervical cancer, when it is caught early, the treatment is inexpensive and it works.
But how often should someone go for the screening?
For screening, process, so that's a good point. So when you go for your first screening, depending on your screening results, some people, they have no signs at all of whatever, then they advise you. I know for some people, they say come back after 3 years. For some people, so it's not like every...
So it varies.
Usually. And then there are some, maybe like if there's something and the doctor wants to watch, they might say, okay, come again next year. But most of the times it's usually like 3 years, every 3 years or so, or every year. And I also talked about depending also on your risk. If you're HIV positive, you might need to get screened regularly, more often. If you're maybe someone who is, your lifestyle, it's a risky lifestyle, they might advise you to go regularly too. But the idea is it's usually 1 to 3 years. But it's important for you to go and be told by a medical professional how often you should get. But that's usually the guidelines. So, but if you've never been screened, I would advise everyone to go and get screened. And it's a very simple process. I've done it several times because I always say, you control what you can. I cannot control whether I'll get it or not, but I can control me getting checked if I have it. And if it's there, I know that the treatment, if it's caught early, it's very simple and it's inexpensive and it's available here in Malawi.
But now, you spoke about the availability of that in Malawi and also that you can go to a government hospital to get screening. But here's the question now. So when I go to the hospital, do I ask to see a gynecologist or do I just say I would like to be screened?
No. So, for example, I know at Queen's where I've been screened before, there's a part where they do what do you call it? That's where you go for contraceptives and all that. So it's a department. That's where they do it. So if you go there, you say, I would like to get screened for that. I know same at Dream. If you go to Dream at Mandala, they do have, you go to your reception and said, I've come, I want to be screened for cervical cancer. I've also done it at Banjalan Sogolo, at Bangwe, so I know they do it in others. You go there too and say, I want to be screened for cervical cancer. So
How long does that process take, do you?
It doesn't take long. So for me, I know there are different, of course, putting in the waiting in line, if there are a lot of people, but the actual process, it's like, less than 15 minutes or so. So 15 minutes or less.
Or less, Now I heard you talking about treatment.
Yes.
How can it be treated?
So as I talked about, if it's caught early, usually the treatment is to kill the cells that have been, I guess, invaded by that virus, and usually the medical person can tell. So one of them, the simplest one that's very common is they use vinegar to kill off those cells. So that's one simple one. There's also the other one. So the idea is to kill off those cells that are affected. The other one they use, I guess they call it cold, like freezing. So they freeze off those. So it's they use that. There's other more advancing, but the main thing, all of those, what they do is kill off the cells that, if left untreated, can develop. Now
I read somewhere that cervical cancer is at the top of the list of one of the cancers that kills the highest number of people in the world.
Yes, true. Especially.
Do you think we're raising enough awareness?
I would say no. Because I think also one thing that we fail as healthcare people or public health people is to understand what it takes for a person to grasp health information and then do something about it to affect their health. So we call that health literacy. So for me, I know sometimes I take it for advantage that I know that cervical cancer can be prevented, and it's a simple thing, whatever, because of my knowledge, because of what I know, right? But if you go to someone who has never heard of this, if you just say, hey, Tabby, you need to go get screened for cervical cancer, whatever, and I expect you to just say, okay, fine, I'll go do it. You know what I mean? So I think I think we can do more in trying to kind of make people understand what cervical cancer is, how dangerous it is. And I'm glad you mentioned that it kills a lot of women. And sadly, though, it's a cancer that can be prevented, and if caught early, can be cured. But when we're raising awareness, do we make people understand? Did you understand? Did you know that? Did you know that cervical cancer is a disease that kills a lot of people, but it can be prevented, and if caught early, it can be cured. So I don't know how. I mean, we have to, I guess, maybe
perhaps some civic education, to encourage people about what it let people know what it is, and then also to make them understand that you need to get screened. Because I think a lot of people don't know that.
And then also making access to the screening exactly easier. Because someone, we have to be mindful. Not everyone can say, okay, I'll go to Queens to get screened, or I'll go to Dream, or I'll go to wherever and get screened. So making sure that we have these services, screening services, accessible to people. And then also, but there's also that other catch that, so what if you screen all these people and you find them that they need treatment? We have to make sure that they have access to treatment, because it's unethical to just screen people and then not have treatment for them. But the main thing, we can also help us as individuals to make sure that understand that if the cervical cancer is caught early, the treatment is simple and inexpensive. Whereas if it's caught in later stages, the treatment is expensive and not accessible to all of us. I'm sure you've seen lately, of course it's not cervical cancer, different cancers, people asking for funds to go outside the country to receive care, which shows that we might not have that here. So it's also important for us to take action in preventing some of these diseases, but also lobbying for our policymakers to make sure that we're making sure that there's access to treatment, access to screening, access to civic education, and like all cancers, it's also important for us to be healthy, physical health, so that means physical exercise, regularly exercise, eating
I'm glad
healthy.
we're talking about that. The food especially.
Eating healthy, because all these things do help. Because as I remember, I said, not just because you've been exposed to the HPV virus, it means you'll get cervical cancer. So the state of your body also does come into play. You know what I mean? So it's important for us to be at the best health that we can be. So I'm sure all of us, including myself, we can admit that we're not in the best of our health. You know what I mean? So it's up to me to kind of do that, and I try. You know what I mean? Because sometimes we always think that I have to get a gym membership, go to the gym every day. No, that's not it. Just walking regularly every day. Make time for your life. Going for screenings, I do that. And if you ask my friends and my family, I always push for them to get that. Because I know that, here in our country and most places in the world, prevention is not an option. You know what I mean? Because we all know that our healthcare system is not the best. So we cannot take those chances. You say, oh, I don't want to get screened, or I don't want to be healthy. No, do something to prevent.
And that's all we had for you in this week's edition of Healthy Living. Remember, Healthy Living is a program where we talk about all things non-communicable diseases. Now, I was joined by Eliza. I was going to say Ndugumu.
You're not the only one. You're not the only one.
Okay, and that's all we had for you in this week's edition of Healthy Living. Now, this week I was joined by Eliza Nkudumula, a public health professional from the Malawi Liverpool Wellcome Trust, and we spoke at length about cervical cancer. But the lesson I've learned, the biggest lesson I've learned, is we can get screened, and we should get screened on the regular, and also that cervical cancer can be prevented and can be cured if it is detected at an early stage. So go to your nearest hospital and get screened. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And until next week, I am Tabby Kamangala, and remember, this program is sponsored by MASM.
Life is an up and down journey where anything can happen at any time. But at any time, you have peace of mind with MAZIM. MAZIM offers all-inclusive affordable medical aid cover in various packages of schemes in line with your budget, with a promise to take care of you and your family in that time of dire need. From giving you access to medical services at hospitals locally and abroad, emergency evacuation, dentist, and optical care, all the way to funeral benefits. MAZIM is there holding your hand, keeping you covered. For details of the medical scheme you need, call 01-820-298, 01-820-543, 0888-707-100, fax 01-820-217, email infodesk@mazim.mw, or visit www.mazim.mw. MAZIM, your ultimate healthcare solution.